I'm Urban Scout. I'm here to rescue you.
I've heard of you.
I see my reputation precedes me. Okay. Let's go.
We'll be safe in here.
Good.
You know, I've been through a lot to rescue you.
Tell me.
Well, I was shot at. I got pushed off a bridge. Saved a kitten from a tree.
You saved a kitten from a tree?
Yeah. Yeah, it was cute. The fire department was there too. It was their ladder, but I mean, I climbed up it. I was walking by. I just saw it. It has really nothing to do with what we're talking about. I got a wedgie.
A wedgie?
Yeah,
That's
a wedgie.
pretty serious.
Yeah.
You look good. You look good.
Thank you. Thank you. So anyway, I've got some questions to ask you, if you don't mind.
Oh no, you rescued me from being tied up, so of course.
You know, I don't know how much time you have. I don't want to.
Well, you've been through a lot. I mean, you got a wedgie, so go ahead and ask.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So, what is sustainability?
Well, most basically, sustainability is the ability to maintain a way of life indefinitely. And so a culture would be sustainable if it can stay in place for all practical purposes forever. You know, I've been bashing civilization, which is this way of life. I've been bashing civilization for a lot of years, and I decided that I'd probably better finally define it. And the way I've defined civilization is a way of life characterized by the growth of cities. And that's defensible both linguistically and historically. And that's nice, Derrick, but what's a city? And a city I've defined as a collection of people living in numbers large enough to require the importation of resources. And the way this ties back to sustainability is as soon as you require the importation of resources, two things happen, which, by the way, also back up a second. A sustainable culture is one that can stay there over time. And where I live is Tolowa land, Tolowa Indians, and Yurok land in Northern California. And the Tolowa lived there for 12,500 years, if you believe the myths of science. If you believe the myths of the Tolowa, then they lived there since the beginning of time. And they did so without destroying their land base. That means that the Tolowa were not civilized because they didn't require the importation of resources. They lived with what the land gave willingly. They would eat salmon and huckleberry and clams and salmon and salmon and salmon and salmon and salmon. And then usually through the winter they would eat a lot of salmon. And
So they ate salmon?
I think actually that they ate salmon. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure they did. And the thing is, there were as many salmon 12,500 years later as there were at the beginning. And to contrast that, this culture has been there for maybe 150, 160, 170 years, and the area's hammered. So two things happen as soon as you require the importation of resources. One is that your way of life will never be sustainable, because if you require the importation of resources, it means you've denuded the landscape of that particular resource. And as your city grows, you'll denude an ever larger area. Cities always require an outside that they're sucking from. And the second thing it means is that if you require the importation of resources, it means that your way of life must be based on violence, because if you require the importation of resources, trade will never be sufficiently reliable. If the people in the next watershed over aren't going to trade you for this, you're going to take it because you need it, which means we could all become absolutely enlightened, and the U.S. military would still have to be huge, because how else are they going to steal everybody's oil? How else are they going to get access to all this oil that they need to run the economy? So on a fundamental level, sustainability can only happen if you are not taking more from the land than you're giving back. It's pretty obvious.
Say that again? If you're not giving back, if
If you're taking more than what you're giving back, then you will never be sustainable. That means that we could all become these nice, wonderful, green, perfect little greeny recyclers, and it wouldn't matter in terms of fundamental sustainability because cities still require the importation of resources, and which means they're still hammering some other area. Say you to quantify this, say you have 100 units of health, and the land is 100% healthy, and then next year it's 99% healthy, and then 98% healthy, and then 97% healthy. By definition, it's not sustainable because it's a declining slope, which eventually will hit zero. A few years ago, I was riding in a car with a friend of mine, and we were stuck in traffic, and I was just making conversation, and I said, so George, if you could live at any level of technology that you wanted, what would it be? And George was not in a very good mood that day, and he said, that's a really stupid question, Derrick, because we can fantasize whatever we want, but the truth is there's only one level of technology that's sustainable, and that's the Stone Age. And we will be there again someday, and the only question really is what's left of the world when we get there. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that any way of living that's based on the use of non-renewable resources won't last. If your way of living is based on, I don't know, let's take a random example, oil. And there are finite amounts of oil, eventually you'll run out. For a way of life to be sustainable, it can't be based on non-renewable resources. And I would go further, and I would say that for a way of life to be sustainable, it can't be based on the hyper-exploitation of renewable resources, like salmon. I know we've all been told this big line about how natural selection and evolution is based on competition, that what you need to do is grab the resources as quickly as you can, but I can disprove that in one sentence if you'll give me a couple semicolons. And
I'll give you two
semicolons.
Okay.
2 semicolons, how many is going to take me? Which is those creatures who survived in the long run have survived in the long run. You would agree with that. Semicolon. And you don't survive in the long run by hyper-exploiting your surroundings. Semicolon. You survive in the long run by actually making your habitat better, by improving the habitat, by having the habitat, the land, be actually glad you're there. I want to say one more thing. If your way of life is based on the hyper-exploitation of renewable resources, it won't last. It's not sustainable. And I would go one step further, and I would say that any way of life that's based on the use of resources won't last. And what I mean by that is that salmon don't consider themselves resources, and trees don't consider themselves resources. They're just salmon, they're just trees. And that's really important because there's a great line by a Canadian lumberman, when I look at trees, I see dollar bills. And if when I look at trees, I see dollar bills, I'm going to treat them one way. And if when I look at trees, I see trees, I'll treat them another way. If when I look at this particular tree, I see this particular tree, I'll treat it differently still. Same with salmon. If when I look at salmon, I see dollar bills, I'm going to treat them one way. If when I look at salmon, I see salmon, treat them differently. If when I look at this particular salmon, I see this particular salmon. It's the same all the way around. If when I look at women, I see orifices, I'll treat them one way. If I see sex objects, I'll treat them one way. If when I look at women, I see women, I'll treat them another way. And if when I look at this particular woman, I see this particular woman, I'll treat her differently still. And that's really crucial because before we can destroy the planet, we have to first fail to perceive it as alive. And one more thing, which is that the fact that we perceive salmon as our neighbors doesn't mean that we can't eat them. And years ago, I was doing a radio interview in Spokane, Washington, and the interviewer said, Indians exploited salmon too. And I said, no, they didn't, they ate them. And he said, what's the difference? And I said, well, they gave them respect for the spirit in exchange for the flesh. And I knew that answer was not really sufficient, but I'm a male, and so I'm required by law to answer every question that anybody asks of me. And that afternoon, I went out and I sat next to this tree I had a long relationship with, and I asked the tree, what is the fundamental predator-prey relationship? And the tree gave me the answer right away, which is, if you consume the flesh of another, you now take responsibility for the continuation of the other's community. So if I consume salmon from the Klamath River, I now take responsibility for the continuation of that community. Everybody knows this. Bears know it, mergansers know it. If the mergansers know that if they eat all the newts in one pond, there's not going to be any newts there anymore. And so what life really is, a sustainable culture, is one in which we recognize that everybody's taking care of everybody else.
I guess this gives me a lot to think about. I feel like I finally have the secret of sustainability.
What's that?
What's that? To give back to the land more than you take.
That's good.
Did I pass? I guess that's it. Thank you, Derrick.
Well, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. We better get out of here, though.
Okay.
All right. Oh, wait. You go that way. I'll go this way.
Okay.
Okay. Right, stop.